Hi, Zizaran here with another video for the Ultimatum League, and today we're going to talk about just generic damage scaling and some tips and tricks you can do for making your build better. A lot of the time you might be following a guide by a streamer and you might feel like you have done a lot of the things and well, you feel like you're doing no damage. Is the guide bad or have you done something wrong? Sometimes it's hard to tell. So I'm just gonna go through a lot of things that could be really useful and help a lot of players. And just to start off with, make sure you have followed the guide. Just yesterday we had somebody who commented, well, your Exsanguinate guide is shit and I do no damage on the Scion. And he had Frenzy included in his Spellslinger link. So he hadn't been following the links as they should. There's another thing that is just like a big warning to new players. I once upon a time had a Cyclone guide where somebody said it was shit, and he had followed the guide to the letter, but too much so, to the point where my axe had been called like Torment Rend, you know, like just something, right? He had an axe with exactly the same name, but mine had been like 550 DPS, whereas his has been 130. So for those that are new to Path of Exile, rare names don't matter. Names on the items don't matter unless they're unique, and then they have like an orange or golden text. Other than that, let's start up with something really important. Gem levels matter a lot for some builds in Path of Exile, but how do you know which ones? So there's not that many attack builds that really benefit that much from gem levels, not at least compared to spell skills. The attack skills that really benefit from gem levels is things like Elemental Hit, Toxic Rain, Caustic Arrow. Those are just like the ones on top of my head. And you can see this by looking up your skill in the Wikipedia and seeing how much it gets per level. You'll see something like Reeve only gets like a 0.2% damage modifier per level, whereas something like, you know, Fireball or even better Flame Wall gets something like a 15 to 30% damage boost per level. So it can be like a very big difference. So pretty much every spell skill you're playing right now, like Exsanguinate, Rend, Firewall, Fireball, Essence Drain, pretty much all of those skills get a huge boost for the level. And that can be like easy to just disregard as a new player. You might be sitting there with a 17, 18, or 19 gem and being like, how much of a difference is it really? So to put it in a different perspective, how much of a boost is it? Well, going from a level 17 to 20 gem for a lot of spell builds is just as strong as going from a 5 link to a 6 link. It can be as much as a 45 to 50% more multiplier. So it's very big. There are some things like Flame Wall that scale like an insane amount. We're going from level 20 to 30, which is obviously only achievable with gear. It can be as much as 3 times the damage. So it is very strong to do gem levels, and that means that a big tip in this video is going to be for a lot of spell skills, just getting like a +1 gem level weapon. So if you're playing a fire skill, you can get +1 fire spells. If you're playing a fist skill, you can get +1 physical spell skills. And if you're wondering what like a spell is, like for example, sometimes we will play Blade Blast with fire conversion. That doesn't make it a fire skill. It's still a physical skill. So make sure you look at the tags of the gem. And that's just all the way at the top. So let's give a quick example of a really good recipe and how to craft something. So I do have a separate video showing this recipe, but basically we have a white one. This happens to have an enchant on it. That's not important. But here we have 2 gems. These both have the tag Chaos and they're 20 quality. It doesn't have to be in 2 gems. You could have 10 gems, but they need to total a quality of 40 and they all need to have the tag that you want. So in this case, Chaos. So when I vendor these 2 now, since both of these are tagged Chaos, they have a total of 40 quality. This is now +1 Chaos spell skill gems. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an augment and I'm going to do a regal. It didn't hit anything, but the next step now is to craft Chaos damage over time multiplier, which is an Unveiled that you get from Betrayal. Everybody loves Betrayal, right? And then I'm going to craft the cheapest, the cheapest one I can. I value 8 alts more than 2 alchemies. And now through Harvest, there is one which I don't have to show as an example right now, but it'll be called Reforge an item, more likely to hit the same rolls. And we don't know exactly how strong this is, but I've used this to make a large amount of items. A educated guess, I'd say that this makes it 100 times more likely to reforge the same. So even though +1 Chaos is actually a fairly rare stat, you actually have a really good chance of hitting that. So I used this a lot last league. They're fairly common to find, and I use this a lot. Like you can do this for +1 fire with dot multiplier, +1 cold with dot multiplier. So that is like a really strong way to get some good items. And another thing to look out for, now that we can unveil suffixes and that they're stronger on the actual item you unveil, you'll be able to find gloves or helmet with +2 gem levels. Sometimes to AoE, sometimes to projectile, sometimes to melee, which isn't super important, but it does work for elemental hit even if you aren't using it as melee. And these can be really strong if you're ever a skill that uses multiple gems. So maybe you have a 6 link in your chest, but you know, a 4 link somewhere else. Essence Drain is a good example of this, where you can have either Blight or Essence Drain in a glove that you've unveiled with +2 duration, +2 AoE, etc. So really strong to do that. And obviously this can be further combined with some advanced crafting with essences. It would take a bit long to cover, but you can do some crazy shit with delirium orbs and chaos unveils. Another really strong things that people underestimate is jewels. Jewels can be incredibly strong, and sometimes, especially in some attack builds, they can be the entire build. I've sometimes had builds where maybe the gear itself was like 5 to 10x, and I put as much as 80 exalts into jewels. And this can be an aspect that a new player completely disregards. And even for like, especially on softcore, 10 to 20 chaos, you can get some insanely strong jewels. And obviously in this league, Ultimatum poops out a lot of chaos. So let's show how to find jewels. So there's a few different ways, but let's say that we are especially looking for softcore jewels and we are only looking for damage. And then let's say we're doing a cyclone crit build with axes. What you can do then is you can look through, like, think about, well, first of all, look at the gem, see what it is, right? There's so many stats you can add. So you can do area damage, you can do increased damage. We can, first of all, we can search for that we want a 4-stat jewel. These are obviously more expensive, but as you can see here, we have just searched for a lot of things, and it doesn't even matter if we've searched for some things that don't exist, because we're just searching for that it wants at least 4 of these stats. Now when we search, we find a 4-stat jewel for a Cyclone Axe build for as little as 2 chaos, and these will give you a large amount of damage. Look at this. We have 19% increased damage, 16% crit multi, and 5% attack speed. That's better than most notables in the game, and probably a lot of people sitting watching this right now might be 1 or 2 points away from a jewel slot, but they might not have taken it because it's like, I don't want to get into it. But this is a good example, and it's pretty easy to just make a list like this, figure out, like for Essence Drain, you have chaos damage, you have spell damage, chaos damage over time multiplier. There's so many stats you can go for. Just search for a lot of them. And if you manage to get a cheap jewel that have 3 or 4 stats for your build, that's really good. Definitely something to look out for, and jewels can be very strong and make a huge difference. And next up, there's another thing that new players disregard a lot. Sometimes they'll see new players sitting there with 2 or 3 life flasks, a mana flask, and maybe a quicksilver. Maybe like literally no utility flask. They're not using a granite, they're not using a quartz, they're not using a jade flask. And obviously, like, there's some builds where I make it like super important, like Essence Drain and Trickster. You need to use a Jade Flask or you're going to be dying all the time. And when you get one, you're basically immortal. But pretty much for most builds, having a Granite and a Jade Flask, when you're able to keep those up all the time, keep it up. Whenever you're able to keep those up permanently, a Jade and a Granite will pretty much keep you immortal. Sometimes people can be scared to use a Granite on acrobatics builds, but a Granite, even with only giving 1,500 armor, makes a very big difference during the campaign, and at least up to yellow maps. Like, even in the first 5 tiers of maps, 1,500 armor does make a big difference. And armor basically mitigates the damage from hits. Jade is incredibly good for avoiding things like porcupines. So would a Rumi's be, like getting high block is really good against things like porcupines. A Quartz Flask is an absolute lifesaver. It makes you phase through monsters. A lot of the times that you die, it's because you get trapped within loads of monsters and they're all able to hit you. One of the best defenses in Path of Exile is, funnily enough, just don't get hit. So definitely worth using a Quartz. Like, on a lot of my builds lately, I will try to make sure to have at least a Jade and at least the Quartz Flask. And some quick tips on how to solve mana issues to get rid of the mana flask. Pretty much any physical attack build, so when you're actually attacking with the weapon in your hand, this does not include things like Blade Blast or Exsanguinate. Even though they are physical based, you're not attacking. But if you're Reeve, Cyclone, Ground Slam, you can get a Viridian Jewel with physical attack damage leached as mana. That can be really, really good. A Cinder Swallow can, especially while clearing, relieve a lot of mana issues and gives you a better potion that gives you a lot back, especially if you're an Ignite build. And another thing that's really good, you can grab the enchant on Boots, which is 70% mana regen if you cast a spell recently. This is really good for especially long boss fights where you aren't able to use a mana flask to begin with. And if you do have to use a mana flask, try to make sure that it's an enduring eternal mana flask. I usually have something useful like warding on it. And curse immunities or immunities in general are very strong on flasks. In priority, the number one most important thing is bleed immunity, then freeze immunity, then curse immunity, and then shock immunity. Shock immunity is pretty easy to give up on softcore because it doesn't matter if you die every once 100 maps to a perfect storm. But on hardcore, that's something that can easily get you killed. And something you'll see at the endgame give advanced players a lot of damage is really expensive flasks like Dying Sun or Bottled Faith. So definitely don't underestimate how much power your flasks have, even the cheap ones like Sulfur, Granite, and Jade, and Quartz. They are very important. Helmet enchants. Now, this is obviously going to be a little bit more build specific, but sometimes you're able to buy a 25% or 40% increased damage enchant pretty cheaply. And if you're not able to get something cheaply that's like directly helping your build, getting some mana restoration on something else might make you do another damage aura. A curse can also be really powerful. Being able to buy a conductivity on hit or a frostbite on hit, anything like that could be really cheap because these drop quite a lot in Delve. And especially on softcore where you might not need as much life, it's very easy to get a cheap one for a few kills. And having a curse being permanently applied without you self-casting it is really strong. And another damage thing which is really good, sometimes you're able to pick up a +2 AoE gems or projectile gems, Tabula Rasa, and this can be really powerful both defensively and offensively, because being able to just nuke bosses down really quickly is really strong. Anyway, I just wanted to make like a generic video with some scaling tips. There's obviously a lot more ways than we've listed here in the video, but here are some that hopefully help you out. Let me know if anything stands out to you that helped you in particular, and feel free to post loads of other comments and tips in the comments for other new players, because as a community we can help out people even more. So, hope you guys are having a good time in Ultimatum. Thanks for watching, sub if you liked the video, but more importantly, try to die less than I do.